Lisa, I'm glad that we could talk today. We had you at Williams Lake Alliance Church here last early summer,
It was
early
Mother's Day.
spring,
It was
Mother's Day,
Mother's Day.
Mother's
Yeah.
Day, and it was a really great time with you. And my conversation with you that weekend, it really inspired me. I have to say, I came away inspired and encouraged and challenged just by your faithfulness to the Lord and your desire to serve him with all that you are. And so hence our conversation today with you about the Lord and our bodies. Because there's a lot of questioning right now out there. It's just so prevalent in the culture that we're living in right now, that how dare the church have anything to say about people's bodies and what they want to do with their bodies, and the question of somebody having a say over me. It's really problematic in a lot of people's minds. But I hoped we could talk about that. And why don't you take us away and share a bit of your story?
Okay. Thank you, Pastor Chris. Appreciate it. I think I'm trying to think of where I should pick up this story. We were talking in this conversation that you mentioned. And I remember sharing a part of my story from when I was, let's say 10, 12, I don't know. And those of you who know me, it won't be hard for you to believe that I was quite a bit of a tomboy. Grew up in the country. I love making tree forts and swinging from the jungle swings. And yeah, I played Barbie dolls, but my Barbie dolls went cliff diving. So, and I remember thinking back then that I wanted to be a boy. Like I was really serious. I actually prayed about it. And what was my logic? It had nothing to do with sexuality. It had everything to do with I'm sitting there wearing frilly leotards, being told to keep my knees together, and my brother's climbing a tree. And I was like, this just
It didn't feel right.
No. But had you given me the choice then to declare, oh, I would have been a boy, kind of like the name John, like, I mean, really, I would have made that choice, and I would have destroyed the woman God created me to be. And I am so grateful now, lots of years later, that I'm a woman, that God created me to be a woman. It wasn't an accident. I am who he created me to be. And there are experiences that I had in Africa. So for those of you who don't know me, I spent 20 years in West Africa with the Alliance. And some of the experiences I had, some of the people that I was able to have great spiritual conversations with, I think were because I'm a woman and not in spite of, who in that context, well, men are the spiritual teachers. And so what's a woman know? So I think, this is very much my own theory, but I feel like had I been a man and gone into the villages that I was in, teaching some community development things, the leaders probably would have said, okay, you listen to him, you get what you can get materially, but don't listen to anything spiritual. What's a woman know? No one, I was no threat. Like, what? A woman's not a spiritual teacher, right? So I think that I was just free to tell stories, and there was a group of people who came to Christ and called me their pastor. And so I celebrate that God used me as a woman in that context.
Wow.
I'm grateful that I didn't follow my 10-year-old thinking. It was nonsense, frankly.
And I mean, today there are people that really struggle even feeling at home in their own bodies, and that's a persistent struggle that doesn't go away. What hope does Christianity hold out to somebody like that?
And I will say, I did not experience that. I mean, for me, it was, a period of some pre-adolescent years, and yet, I mean,
You've handed your body over to the Lord and said, here, use this,
Yes.
right? Everything from uh, sexuality to vocation. Like the fact is, you let God call you to take not just your big heart over to Africa, but he took your body over there,
Indeed,
and
he did.
that entailed some suffering
Um,
too.
uh, the first verse that pops into my mind when I hear you say this is when Paul writes, I urge you, in light of God's mercy,
Mm-hmm.
to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. So there is an element of sacrifice, living a celibate life, not always the first choice,
Right,
not always the fun choice,
right,
but uh, the right choice in
right.
in some instances, and not for everybody. I'm not trying to say that.
But that's been God's choice for you.
Yes, yes. And there were times I didn't want to accept it, but now that at this stage of my life, I celebrate it.
Mm.
Psalm 63:1 says, my soul thirsts for you, God.
Mm-hmm.
My flesh yearns for you.
Wow. I hadn't thought
There's
about that one before. That's both and.
there's it's both and. It's both and. It's my spirit, that we think of that as the spiritual part of us, and the body's just along for the ride.
Yeah.
But it's no, my soul longs for you, God. My flesh yearns for you. Psalm 32, verse 3, when David's talking about his sin, and he says, when I kept silent about my sin,
Mm-hmm.
i.e., I did not repent,
Yeah.
my body wasted away through my groaning all day long.
Wow.
So there's this, again, there's a connection between who we are and the package we're in. It's not this divided,
Mm-hmm.
God wants my soul, and well, he had to put me in something so I can so I recognize other people out there. So, well, this is the package I got.
Yeah.
It's not divided like
So,
that.
so how does this unity of soul and body,
Mhm.
and spirit, soul, and body, really, how does this unity speak to the big questions of our day? And today primarily I wanted to address the question of people feeling out of place and uncomfortable in their bodies,
Mhm.
and that what the question that brought me to this conversation is primarily the transgender question, or the question of gender dysphoria. But as I'm thinking about it, I realized that the same questions and the same responses to those questions would speak to other issues that are at the fore in our culture right now too, because the same logic that would say I feel uncomfortable in my body because of my what feels like a mismatch between my biological sex and the gender that I feel that I am, um, gender dysphoria, and therefore I should change my body so that it lines up, and the idea that that is good. There should be self-determination in terms of what happens with my body. That same logic would also lead a person who is at end of life to say, this body isn't serving me very well anymore, and I feel uncomfortable in this body, and therefore I'm going to change this body, although change it differently. I'm going to end this body's life,
Right.
so that and both of those are acts of self-determination. um but really the logic is the same. I don't What hope does
Yeah.
Christianity give to somebody who feels profoundly uncomfortable in their
Yeah.
own skin?
Yeah. These are very good questions, and they're complicated, and there aren't simple answers. But let me say, my thinking has been very much informed by an author called Nancy Pearcey.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote a brilliant book called Love Thy Body.
Hmm.
And it's not about people who think they're too fat or too thin, and I hate myself, and so I'm going to exercise until I'm beautiful. That's not it at all.
That's what it sounds like.
I know it does, right? I think
Yeah.
it's written for 12-year-old girls who don't like the bumps that are appearing, but no, it's not that at all. In her book, she goes through and she goes back to Darwinianism and how secular thinking has permeated our society in the sense of what makes a person. And so secular morality, secular thought assumes that a person is kind of split from his or her body, as if the body is merely the physical package that the person is in. And the body is just something like the real person is the soul, the emotion, the values, the relationships, that's the real person. And then the body is just the pragmatic, what you need to keep the soul alive, to house the soul.
Biblically speaking, that sounds a lot like what the Bible, New Testament writers describe as Gnosticism.
Gnosticism, exactly. And so Christianity holds body and soul together as an integrated person, like two sides of the same coin. So let me run quickly through Piercy's argument, because it really builds. She starts off by talking about the issue of abortion, and she says, okay, and I'm paraphrasing her, right? So, so she starts off by saying, well, we used to argue, pro-life argument used to go that, well, life begins at conception. Because really, that's not an argument anymore, because everybody believes that. So the scientists are going to say, or whoever is going to say, sure, this blob of human tissue, these cells, it's human tissue, but it's not yet a person. So when the blob turns into a person is when it starts recognizing mommy's voice. There starts to be affection and emotion and relationship, and so it's really arbitrary where that lands.
Right. Like how do you pinpoint the moment that takes place?
That's arbitrary. And that's why there's all sorts of arguments where up to what point is abortion okay. But the point being is until that blob becomes a person, it's disposable.
Oh, wow.
And so then if you push that one to end of life, my father's in long-term care with dementia. He's not my daddy anymore in many ways. His personality has changed. He sometimes knows who I am, sometimes he doesn't. He's so different. Conversation's just gone.
Wow.
So you could argue, well, he's not a person anymore. He's not who he was.
Right.
And so then, well, of course, assisted dying is fine then, because he's not a person anymore. Her next chapter talks about, she explores some of the free sex movement of the 60s and 70s, and saying, so if your personhood is separate from your body, well, then your body's become, well, your plaything. And so your person is not affected, so the argument goes, by your sexual behavior. So then you can, well, have different partners frequently, like, well, the free sex movement with the one-night stand stuff. And secular thought has accepted that. Although there are certainly people who say, no, secular people will go, no, that's not right. But largely that's the way the argument goes. That, well,
what my body doesn't matter as long as my heart's in the right place.
Yes, right. I'm not hurting anybody. And yet, if we're honest, we know that human emotion is strongly connected to human sexual activity. It's not completely separate, but that's the way, so the argument goes. So then if the free sex thing is okay, well, then let's hop to homosexuality. So if I can be in any heterosexual bed I want, well, what's the difference if it's a homosexual bed? So because, my body strictly exists for my pleasure. Which does not fit the biblical worldview. And we'll come to that in a second. So then the next chapter she goes into is the transgender one that you mentioned, because then now if my body, it just exists for my pleasure, well, if it pleases me to change it
Right.
in drastic ways to fit who I think I am,
Right.
well, then that's fine. You know, that's kind of, and obviously this is oversimplifying the train of thought. That's kind of the brief overview. The biblical worldview is different.
How so?
The first things I'm thinking of are the verses that speak to us of honoring God with our body.
Right. Yeah, Romans 12.
Yes, being a sacrifice, offering ourselves as a sacrifice. Paul's, there's one in Colossians chapter 3, I think, but I don't know the verse, where it says, whatever you do, honor God with your body. There's another that, eat or drink, honor God with your body. Then if we go back to creation, when God differentiates between male and female, and it's good. Yeah. And another important one about the flesh is when we think of the incarnation of Jesus Christ.
Right.
He came as a human person.
Yeah.
In a human body. And Peter tells us that he bore our sins in his body.
Right.
His bodily suffering mattered. It wasn't just agony of soul. That was part of it too.
Oh, huge part of it.
My Father, God, my God, where are you? Why have you forsaken me? There was definitely agony of soul, the pain of being abandoned, all that, the pain of being betrayed. So there was certainly soul agony. But his body was beaten, disfigured beyond recognition. And it's the scripture that he bore our sins in his body.
On the cross, yeah. And we, I think in order sometimes to avoid the thought of Jesus only suffered physically, and in the churches that I've been in growing up, there's been a much more of an emphasis on his spiritual suffering. To where we can almost be not dismissive of, but minimize the physical and say, well, the spiritual is all the suffering. That's what really matters most. But it's, again, you're pointing biblically. If we're going to look at it biblically, it's both.
Right. And that's just not one off. Hebrews 10:10 says that we've been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Colossians chapter 1, somewhere down near the bottom of chapter 1. Sorry, I didn't look at these up. I just thought of this one, where it says, once you were alienated from God, were enemies in your mind because of your evil behavior.
Yeah.
But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation, if you continue in your faith.
Wow.
So we're reconciled to God through Christ's body, not just his soul suffering.
So all of this says Christianity takes the body seriously. We don't say, who cares about that thing? It's only the heart that matters. Right.
The body is we are body and spirit, a package, and it's not a separate thing. That's who we are. And then another piece of that, so then you could argue, well, Jesus' body made some difference then, but what about now?
Yeah.
Well, what about now? What happened after his death? There was a resurrection.
Yeah.
There was an ascension of a physical body. The ascension shows us that Christ having a body wasn't just a temporary thing until he did this work of salvation. His human nature is permanently connected to his divine nature.
Oh, yeah, because when he came back from the grave, he's like, touch me.
Yeah. He's still got, it was a glorified body. It was a changed body. But
it was still a body.
Yes, and we will have resurrected bodies as well.
I think
death separates body and soul.
Yeah.
But that's a ripping apart of what God intended to be together.
Wow.
And here's a quote from Nancy Pearcey. She says, "We won't be saved out of the material creation, but we'll be saved together with the material creation."
Yeah. And you know what, Paul speaks to that when he talks about the resurrection. And this is where, I guess, where we go as Christians for our hope. is it's not all going to be great for our bodies here.
No,
I mean,
we're
there,
wasting away. We're
yeah.
we're
But and
suffering.
in First Corinthians 15:42
Yes.
and onward, Paul talks about, the body that we're living in now, the body that is sown or buried someday
Yep.
is perishable, it will be raised imperishable. It's sown in dishonor. Like some of us live in bodies that don't look really honorable in a lot of ways, in a lot of ways. And
Touche. Yes.
right. And and there's a lot about my body that I hope will look different in
Yeah.
heaven. And we live in bodies that are sown in weakness, but will be raised,
Yes.
in glory, in
Yes.
glory. So that brings our hope. Like as Christians, for so much of our great hope is not that when I become a Christian, God's going to make me healthy and wealthy and successful. It's that whatever God takes me through, whether it's earthly success or earthly suffering, my hope isn't just here. There's a greater hope someday. And I think what you're pointing us to is that the hope for our bodies is not just here,
That's right.
but the solution. God, Jesus, I mean, he healed a lot of people. He makes bodies right, but sometimes the hope is in eternity.
Yes. And those ones still died. Those people he healed, they still went and died. How many years?
Exactly.
But yeah, there's a time coming. No
Yeah.
more pain, no more sorrow, no more temptations,
Yeah.
including sexual temptations. I mean, those are huge ones.
Yeah.
What human doesn't struggle with those?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be, I mean, not all of us have all the same, for sure, they're different, but whatever the sexual temptation is, that will be gone.
Yeah.
That will
Wow.
be gone. And when you think of especially a young person going, how am I going to live with this body I don't like, I don't fit in, for how many years?
Yeah.
How do I live with this same-sex attraction for how many years?
Yeah.
And it does feel, I don't want to belittle that,
Right.
because it's long.
For some people, it never goes away.
Right. And it is long, sort of, but on the scale of eternity, it's not.
And
Yeah.
I can't help but think about Jesus, who, I mean, who had a reason to feel less at home in a human body?
Yeah, he didn't fit, did he? And yet, all the fullness of the deity lived in bodily form.
Wow.
God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in Jesus, Colossians
Yeah.
tells.
Right.
So somehow that body,
Yeah.
human body, was capable of holding that.
Right.
But other places I'm thinking about it in the Old Testament, where it talks about there was nothing about Jesus that would attract us to him. So he wasn't super hunk. He was just an ordinary guy.
Right.
Right? He just,
Yeah.
I kind of like to think that he has space between his front teeth.
The divine diastema?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that okay? We'll go with that. I've got other questions I'm not sure would make it into the eventual conversation. If a person feels completely a misfit in their body, and they say, well, Chris, you if you had the opportunity to get eye surgery to correct your vision problems,
Yes.
would it be sinful to get eye surgery to correct your vision? I mean, I wear contact lenses, and if I get, or for that matter, I mean, any kind of bodily modification for a
Yeah, get a knee replacement,
a knee replacement, or a 14-year-old to get braces for their teeth.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? I mean, these are all sort of they're body modifications.
Yes.
To feel more at home, more confident in our bodies, to get liposuction, to get Botox injections.
Yes.
We could talk about anything from glasses to Botox, really, but they're all attempts to make our bodies feel better. And we don't think they're necessarily wrong, any of those things. Why is it so wrong for a person to have gender reassignment surgery?
Yeah, those are big. I would actually argue, would I strongly argue? I would suggest
Yeah.
that things like Botox
Yeah.
could, and plastic surgery to wrinkle remove and those kinds of things could be hating our bodies too. We hate the real body we've been given. And
Hmm.
so we love this fictitious one that we want to create. So in that some ways, that's a misplaced worship.
Yeah.
Glasses, that's function.
Okay.
I can't see. So it's
Right. Right.
they become dangerous to drive, so in
Yeah.
that sense, it's
Yeah.
that,
Okay. So
that
there's a spectrum of thinking here.
yeah, there is a spectrum.
It's an important
It's an
question. If you can
important
modify your body with laser eye surgery, why can't I modify my body with a sex change?
right, because you're
Um,
not I think when we go back to what does God declare when he creates us?
yeah.
He created us male and female. He didn't say he created us redheads, blonde, and brunette, and they were very good.
Hmm.
Like uh,
Are you
so
saying coloring your hair is wrong?
no, I'm saying coloring your hair is not essential to that's not the distinguishing thing that God pointed out about us.
Right, right.
He didn't say, I created them Asian, African, and Caucasian
Yeah,
and brown or whatever. He doesn't say I created those and those were good, although those are good,
yeah,
but that's not a distinguishing thing. The distinguishing thing that God said he created was
yeah,
male and female with a purpose. Purpose of sex is to express that one flesh covenant.
yeah.
And so the male and female part is essential. And when we start cutting things off and adding things, it does not change the chromosomal DNA difference.
It sure doesn't.
God
No,
put
that it
in
doesn't
there.
change that. And so here's an example that I'll toss out there that that makes a little sense to me. I'll see what you think about this. I thought of two instances in which a woman might get a mastectomy.
Mhm.
And I mean, I'm sure we both know women who have had mastectomies because of cancer.
Right. Yeah.
Um, Totally legitimate procedure in our minds, I'm sure. You need to deal with
Life
it,
saving.
life
Yeah.
saving. But then a woman who says, I feel like a man and I want to become a man would also get a mastectomy. What's the difference? And in my
Mhm.
mind, the difference is because in one case, you're dealing with something that's not working right
Yeah.
and threatens life, and is it's a flawed part.
Yeah. It's a
In the
flood, it's an invasion. So it's excising the enemy cells that are
Yeah.
trying to kill the person,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Versus in the other case, what is it?
taking away healthy tissue to
Yeah, it's
change.
taking away something that God has called good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think another whole piece is the redemptive element in the sense of if you have done these things, if you
right.
have, you're not beyond God's love and care and redemption. And
Oh, preach.
like you were enemies of God, enemies in your mind.
Yeah,
Where does most sin take place? I would argue actually all of it starts here.
yeah.
Is um, we were enemies in our minds because of our evil behavior.
Hmm.
And but he's redeemed you through his blood, and then we were raised with Christ. He's forgiven us. I'm in Colossians these days. I'm preparing a preach on Colossians and this weekend, and I'm yeah, but he's forgiven us all our sin,
Yeah.
canceling the charge of our legal indebtedness that we deserve,
Hmm.
taking it all away, nailing it to the cross
Yeah.
in his body.
In his
And,
blood. Yeah.
and since you've been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, set your minds on things above where Christ is.
Hmm.
Therefore, get rid of all such sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed. rid yourselves of all such things as these. And I say, yeah, there's a part we do, but we work with what he does. We can't,
Mm-hmm.
who can rid themselves of all these sins? None of us can. And I think sometimes we're not fair to people who struggle with same-sex attraction or gender, what's the word?
Dysphoria.
I think we're not fair to them as if we set them aside as some sort of extra creepy sin.
Mm.
And forgetting that we deal with lust, impurity, greed, idolatry.
It's
Lying.
all in the same list, isn't it?
It is. It
Yeah.
is. And yeah, and there's hope for us all. And without for Jesus Christ, every single one of us would be toast. And I mean that quite literally, because the wages of sin is what?
Is death. Yeah.
What do I deserve? What do I deserve?
Mm.
I deserve eternal separation from God.
Yeah.
But I won't get it because of grace.
Mm.
I was his enemy.
Mm.
And he died for me. And I chose to believe that. And now I'm his child.
Yeah.
That doesn't make me better than anybody else. That makes me owing a debt of love. And that makes me grateful.
Yeah.
So there you go, free sermon.
Good word. Thanks, Lisa.